fact of the matter is women do not find sexual satisfaction having sex outside of marriage, even though that's what they're told that they will do, and they will have a better sex life outside of marriage. Men can have access to sex with absolutely no problem. Men don't have to wait to have sex with someone because women don't feel like the sex that they are having needs to be with someone who will support them, raise children with them, or marry them. So sex is economically cheap. Men are able to have sex incredibly easily. Women don't enjoy sex in the same way when they're not married because it's unstable and they don't know that it's going to last. Men are really let off the hook and women are the ones who are paying the price. So really, the first thing that made sex cheap was the advent of birth control. With the advent of birth control, physical pleasure became entirely separate from the consequence of that physical pleasure. Sex became so much more about just stimulation than it did about the connection you were having with that other person and recognizing that that person could be the father of your children. Sex has become economically cheap in our day and age, where it's just easy access from both a physical perspective and an online perspective. You can have sex in really any form you want without working very hard for it. We know that sex and pregnancy are absolutely linked, but birth control gives you the perception that the worst outcome of sex, the most unnatural outcome of sex, is pregnancy. I'm not somebody who believes that sex is only for the purpose of having a child. Sex is about intimacy for a couple. It makes a couple come together closer and express their emotional feelings for each other in a physical way. It should never be treated lightly, even though in 99% of cases or 96% of cases for most birth controls, you won't get pregnant. When we have economically cheapened sex so that it's just available at any time to anyone, it makes it so that it is a lot harder to get married, because now it's not just, oh, men are going to get married to have sex and have a family. Men now have to come to a conclusion that the relationship they are in is pure enough for it to lead to marriage. So what ends up happening is you have women who want to wait being put in a position of having to consider their options. Can they wait? Will they be able to find a guy who's willing to wait for them? Because now that sex is so cheap, he can go anywhere. He doesn't have to wait for you. So the empowerment narrative that, oh, we should all be having as much sex as possible before we're married, outside of marriage, and that's really empowering. Who is it empowering? At the end of the day, it gives over much more power to men. Men are the ones who get to now have access to something that they didn't have access to before unless they made the commitment, unless they promised to support you and stay with you. And you know who's losing? Women. The fact of the matter is women do not find sexual satisfaction having sex outside of marriage, even though that's what they're told that they will do, and they will have a better sex life outside of marriage.
I am not a conservative, and this will come as a shock to many of you, because I know that a lot of my fans like to interpret what I do and what I say on this YouTube channel as if it were somehow the world's most indirect and subtle endorsement of conservatism. And the most fundamental reason why I'm not a conservative is that I don't want to be part of a political movement that is built on a lie. I certainly do not want to be part of a religion that's built on a lie. And you may be saying, whoa, 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 Eisel Mazard, you are way more attractive and way more Jewish than Abigail Shapiro. Isn't this worldview a little bit tempting for you? I see the position of conservatives in the 21st century as being a little bit like the believers in a flat earth. And there's a very important lesson for us to learn, for all of us to learn, regardless of what movement you may be a part of or what new movement you may aspire to start, a movement that doesn't yet exist in the world. When you consider our moment in history in terms of having 1,000 years before it and 1,000 years to come, there are fewer and fewer people today who believe the earth is flat. Why? Is that just a fad? Is that just a trend? Is it just, well, maybe there are flat earthers who passionately believe that in fact their movement is gaining numbers. In fact, more and more people see the world their way. Abigail Shapiro, as passionately as she may argue for her worldview, for her cosmology, she must admit that there are fewer people who agree with her today than there were 1,000 years ago. There are fewer people who agree with her today than there were 2,000 years ago. And hilariously, her worldview cannot be very well vindicated by even a casual reading of the Bible, where the reality of prostitution, the reality of husbands cheating on their wives and wives cheating on their husband is attested to in a much more earthy, realistic fashion than she is willing to admit herself. Abigail Shapiro's worldview relies on a denial of reality that's, much more blatant, much more easily empirically challenged than the belief that the world is flat. You certainly can, get up out of your house and walk to the grocery store without encountering anything that's going to challenge or overturn the assumption that the world's flat. That very limited sense of daily reality. However, the belief that wives do not enjoy cheating on their husband, that women do not enjoy sex out of wedlock, the belief that traditional patriarchy, such as the Muslim world still enjoys, the idea that traditional patriarchal marriage, with the women at least being virgins until marriage and then being purchased as property and controlled by one man throughout the rest of their lives, the belief that that benefits women, that it benefits women and oppresses men, whereas the modern Western liberal system of dating, sexual freedom, marriage, and indeed a great deal of fornication, and indeed a great deal of wives cheating on husbands and husbands cheating on wives, that modern Western decadent liberal world, the belief that oppresses women and benefits men, just as it claims to, in fact, liberate women from that former patriarchy, that is based on a set of lies and a denial of reality. So fundamental, so blatant, so anti-empirical, so ridiculous, that it's hard to get up out of your kitchen and walk to the grocery store and walk back again without dealing with the contradictions. I don't have a whole lot of friends. At any given time, I have friends who are talking to me about the fact that the wife is cheating on the husband or the husband is cheating on the wife. I amass anecdotes of this kind throughout my life. And sometimes my viewers, people who are not my friend, people who just know me from the channel, they're writing in and asking me for advice because they're stuck in precisely these situations. Now, my dismally realistic view of life on Earth is that we are mammals. Is that, for example, we evolved the ability to speak because we have a cavity in our mouths. The shape of the roof of our mouths was formed so that we as mammals could engage in breastfeeding. So we have this mechanism, this wonderful mechanism that we've elaborated into thousands of different languages to form millions of different ideas that we communicate this way that would otherwise be impossible as a kind of unintended side effect of what we really needed to evolve to survive, which was the capacity to engage in breastfeeding. And in this same way, we have very simple, short-term adaptations, instinctual adaptations, and behavioral adaptations that are not so different for us as human beings than they would be for a hamster, for a gerbil, for a rodent, or for a monkey. But just as the function of speech is not limited to its evolved purpose, it's not limited to drinking milk from the breast or screaming out in pain, expressing the very few things that we needed to survive millions of years ago. In the same way, what we're capable of sexually, what we're capable of psychologically, what we're capable of morally goes far, far beyond the remit, far, far beyond the limit of what it is to be born a mammal, of what it is to be born a product of evolution. The trick to being an adult human being is not to let your instincts and your desires be a limit for what you think you personally are capable of, to not let human nature define and delimit the richness of the human experience. I have a further challenge for you. I want you to imagine if you were in the same unenviable position of Abigail Shapiro, that everything you believed in was in fact becoming less and less popular as the centuries go by. If you were in the position of supporting an ethical view of the world that you knew was less popular today than it was 1,000 years ago and would be less popular still 10 years from now, 20 years from now, a century from now, if you knew you were on the losing side of history. I've had a lot to do with this particular unpopular view of the world called veganism. It's incredibly unpopular. But I notice that vegans live with this encouraging delusion that no matter how small a percentage of the population we are, our ethical system, our worldview is more popular today than it was a century ago. It's more popular today than it was 1,000 years ago. That therefore we are on the winning side of history. What if everything you believed in, everything you valued ethically, politically, were instead in that impossible position that conservatives have put themselves in? What if you had to accept, with all due humility, that you represented a minority that would, in the next 1,000 years, a despised minority, forever remain? Sympathy is an analytical tool. Thinking that way leads to a very useful kind of sympathy for the position that conservatives are now in.